Undoubtedly I say, whenever I leave the house, and on whatever thing my eyes fall on, Sabr. Allah Ta'ala says, Wallahu yuhibbu as-sabirin. Allah Ta'ala is lief with our
School governing body of South Coast Madrasa.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're at Lanzai School Hall in Lenasia, where Qari Fatih Seferagic is lending a program titled A Moment with the Quran. Seferagic hails from the United States of America and emulates his recitation of the Quran on Mishari Rashid bin Alafasi. The program has really captivated the audience. There was also renditions by Hafid Yusuf Osman and Nasheeds as Naats as well. Now let's go have a look and see how these two young talents recite the Holy Quran and how beautiful they recite the Holy Quran.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahmanir Rahim Maliki Yawmiddin Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألف لام ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين الذين يؤمنون بالغيب ويقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون أولئك على هدى من ربهم وأولئك هم المفلحون بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Oftentimes when people associate beauty of Quran, they associate it with a voice or a reciter. And it's not that you can say that, someone reciting the Quran in a beautiful fashion doesn't make the Quran beautiful. That is one of the beauties of the Quran. But the Quran has many, many beauties that we overlook because we focus on one thing and one thing alone, and everything else kind of just doesn't matter anymore. And so one of the most important beauties of the Quran, above the fact that it can be recited in a beautiful fashion, is that it also is one of the greatest miracles of all times. All times. Out of all the miracles that the prophets have had, whether it's splitting the ocean in half, whether it's bringing back someone from the dead, or turning a staff into a snake, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the Quran, which is a book, and calls it one of the greatest miracles of all time. And there's a reason for that. When you ask a child a question, children are usually a little more innocent, and they'll give you an answer that's more honest, more truthful. So my mom was teaching Sunday school back in the States, because we have schools on Sunday and so on for the kids that maybe can't attend Islamic school and they need some, some kind of Islamic education, so they set up Sunday schools. I'm not sure if you guys have those here. And so during these Sunday schools, they teach them a bit about Islam, the prophets, the Quran, and so on and so forth. So my mom had to teach these children, these very young children. And so when she tells them about the miracles of the other prophets, and then tells them about the miracle of our Prophet ﷺ and our religion, one of the kids goes, but that's not fair. How come the other prophets get these cool miracles and we get stuck with like a book, And even though it's a child and it sounds kind of rude or disrespectful to say that, many of us in our minds might not say that, but at the same time we just think, this is just a book. Or we treat it as just a book because what does it do? It just sits on our shelves, it lays around our house, and the only time we actually do read the Quran or do anything when it comes to the Quran is when we maybe pray Taraweeh in the month of Ramadan, or when we pop in a CD with one of our favorite reciters and, just listen to it in the car and that's it. Like, mashallah, he recited it beautifully, I've done my part for the day. The Quran, subhanAllah, has a lot of miracles. And just one of the miracles that you can think of, and I'm going to be mentioning a few, is that if you look in the Western world, I'm not sure about how it is here, we have Oprah, most of you guys know who Oprah is, right? So, if a book is successful, right, if there's a really good written book that changed a lot of people's lives or, did something to impact a person's life, you'll find books on 10 ways to lose weight really quickly and all the women jump on that book and you see reviews in the back, it's changed my life forever, I'm a new person and I have this new look, and all these people are so happy with this book, right? And all it did was what? Change maybe their weight, their look on the outside, just a little bit. And then the book gets featured on Oprah, and Oprah's like, look at all these people, they've really appreciated this book, it has amazing reviews, it's changed so many lives. And then the book is what? Considered a really good book. But if you look at the Quran, how many people around the world have actually bought a copy of the Quran or read the Quran? And then after that, how many reviews do you think the Quran has gotten? Right? If there was like an Amazon review thing on the internet for the Quran, instead of tafsir and stuff, you'd see how many stars and how many long comments you'd get there instead of the books that we have today. But the Quran has many explanations, many scholars have commented on it, given reviews if you could say, right? And so the Quran has been also elevated to that sense. But on top of that, if you want to look at how amazing a book is, as I mentioned earlier, just look at and see how it changed someone's life. Right? So someone might sell that book for weight loss and they lose weight, but let's look at the Quran. The Quran was sent to people, and not only did it change their lives in one way, it changed the person completely, from the way they ate, right? Eating with your right hand, some small things like that, not even like a big thing about themselves. It goes to small things, whether it's changing, how you eat, how you sit, how you pray, how you talk, how you walk, right? Everything about you has changed. Right? When you're a Muslim and you compare yourself to a non-Muslim, you do so many things differently. So many. And that comes to show you the power of a book that we consider just a book. But this book that we consider just a book does what? It changes us to a different level. And that's one of the beauties of the Quran, and that's the power of the Quran. Another miracle of the Quran is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it so easy for us to memorize, not to understand. And what I mean by that is you can't just read one ayah or two ayahs, copy paste something and then give your own tafsir opinion on that ayah explanation. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant. You can memorize those words, but it takes time and a lot of scholarly reading and understanding to actually break down an ayah and say, this is what I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant. Right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the Quran easy for us to memorize. How many people in this room know a hafiz? I'm pretty sure you know at least one hafiz in this room, personally. If you were to ask a Christian, how many people do you know that memorize the Bible? Personally. I've asked so many, I don't think I've gotten a single, even one, that knows the entire Bible the way we know the Quran. The way a little 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old knows the Quran. Alhamdulillah, I memorized the Quran at the age of 12. I started when I was 9. My teacher finished at the age of 7. There's kids that finish at the age of 6. You know them. I know them. Right? You won't find that in any other religion where people memorize the Quran with such ease. Such ease. If today something happened to the Quran, all the physical copies of the Quran, if they were to disappear, it would be so easy for the Muslims just to come back together and meet in one masjid, just a local community of hufaz. Each masjid would have their own new version of the Quran that would be exactly the same as what was there before, because how many people have it memorized? So it can never be lost. Even if every physical copy was burned in this world, the Quran would still exist. That's a miracle in itself, subhanAllah. No other religion can say that. If every single Bible and every single version of the Bible was lost now, you would maybe be left with just a few lines and quotes here and there and what people slightly remember. And when you say that a Muslim knows the Quran, there's hufaz that might not know it that perfectly. They call themselves hufaz, which is their right. But then there's people that you guys have seen as well that know their Quran, you know, like to the dot. They can sit there and this ayah is here and it's this verse and line on this page and this and that. And then there's riwayat, different recitation styles and methods. And so people have those memorized as well. Right? So that's a miracle in itself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preserving it. But if you were to ask someone, you know, a Muslim, or if they were asked by another person, why is the Quran a miracle? What would they say? How would you explain to someone why the Quran is a miracle? The first thing most adults do, when someone asks them why is the Quran a miracle, what do they like to pull out? Scientific miracles. Right? The Quran is amazing, it's a miracle because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about birth or stuff that goes on in the womb this long ago. Before a microscope, before technology. It has to be a miracle, right? Or people will point out something about an ayah about the ocean or something, or a mountain or some kind of tree or leaf, and after science has proven that now, they go, you see, it took science this long, we had it in the Quran. But at the end of the day, how much of the portion of the Quran is actually scientific miracles? Not that long, or not that much. Just a very few ayat in comparison to the rest of the Quran. Most of the Quran is what? Stories. Stories. And why is that? To teach us. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that we as human beings have sort of this thing of repeating our mistakes. You know how they say history repeats itself? There's a reason why people say that. Right? Almost anything and everything that's being done in today's society has been done in one way or another in history. Maybe it looked different, and it sounded different on paper or whatever. But in one way or form, it was pretty much the same thing. Genocide is genocide. Injustice is injustice. Cruelty is cruelty. Right? It might be done in different ways, but at the end of the day, mankind repeats the same mistakes. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us in the Quran by giving us stories. So that when we read these stories, we can reflect on the people that came before us and the mistakes that they made so that we don't make them again.
وسلموا تسليما حتى تنالوا جنة ونعيما صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما حتى تنالوا جنة ونعيما صلوا عليه.
And the biggest thing that makes the Quran a miracle, in my opinion, if you were to ask me, is that the Quran has the ability to change a person's heart. It has the ability to change you as a person completely. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. Umar radiallahu anhu. You guys know who he is, right? For the most part, you guys know who Umar radiallahu anhu is? Okay. Umar radiallahu anhu was what? On his way to kill the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what happened? And this is just a short summary of the story. He goes and stops by his sister's house because he finds out that she's Muslim on the way. And so he goes to confront her. And by the time he leaves her house, he reads a few verses of what? Surah Taha. The beginning of Surah Taha. And not only does he decide to not go kill the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? Instead, he changes his mind and also goes to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and what? He becomes a Muslim. Right? Now I want you guys to understand how amazing that is. When he did walk into his sister's house and he saw his sister reading, I want you guys, if you have any siblings, if you've ever had siblings, or if you have siblings, I want you to imagine this scenario. Umar radiallahu anhu was so upset with his sister when he found out what she was reading, that he struck her until she started bleeding. Her face started bleeding. Now as a guy, it's a little more easier to imagine because you're a guy. Imagine hitting a little sister or a girl to a point where she starts bleeding. Okay? You must be really angry as a man or as a person to get to that level in your heart or in your conscience where you can be okay with doing something like that. Because no one just walks up to a younger sister or a girl and starts smacking her around and making her bleed. Right? No one. It takes some kind of hatred, or it takes some kind of passion for something in your heart to do that. So from that extreme, where you have something in your heart so disgusting, where you leave the house of your sister and you go and accept Islam, is a huge dramatic change. Because the reason why he was even doing that to his sister in the first place was why? Because of his hatred for Islam. So his hatred was completely removed and it turned into a love. And that was what? The power of the Quran. A few verses of Surah Taha. And nothing else. And the hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that's what changed him. And today as well, if a person were to take the Quran seriously, not just read it, read a translation, listen to one or two tafsirs by Mufti Mank and think, alhamdulillah, I'm a mufassir now, I've done my part for the Quran, right? Instead, we all have to sit and actually try to develop some kind of relationship with the Quran. Because once you have that relationship with the Quran, once you develop that love, once you develop that understanding, what does it do to you? It changes you as a person, I promise you that. Even whether you're young or old. For the younger people, it's the same thing. But for the younger people, it's a little more difficult to understand how they can spend their time really with a book and it's going to change them. But I promise you, if you spend enough time with the Quran, if you understand enough of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to say to you, you will change as a person. That's for sure. And that proof in that is when the Quran was revealed to the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the beginning when Islam was first starting, the ayat that were revealed weren't ayat telling people this is haram, this is halal, don't do this, do this. They were ayat of what? Iman, heaven, hell, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath, His mercy. It got them to have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by what? Building their iman, their taqwa. And then later on when they moved to Medina and then the laws started coming down, it was no problem because whatever law Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down, what? They already had that love and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their hearts, so everything else came easy, came naturally. It wasn't like a inner struggle or battle. Because whatever they loved and whatever they had to give away, they loved Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a lot more. So that's the first thing we have to understand. That's the main thing I'm trying to convey here, is that the Quran is not something that we should just listen to in a beautiful voice and think that's enough. That's our part at the end of the day. There's more that needs to be done. There has to be an understanding. There needs to be a relationship. There needs to be a connection. There needs to be some kind of thirst for understanding what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually trying to tell you. And those are the things that are important. So with that said, inshallah, I'm going to go on to the next part, on which is my advice for people that want to memorize the Quran. Now, before I even talk about that, you guys have to understand that in today's society, people really put someone who's memorized the Quran up here. Right? They put people who've memorized the Quran up here on a high pedestal, as if they're a sheikh or some great scholarly person or someone that's better than you or someone you know, because what? They just memorized a few words or a bunch of words, right? And they can repeat it from memory. But anyone can memorize anything, right? Even a parrot can memorize the words that you repeat to it eventually, right? And repeat it back to you. Right? It's not enough just to memorize the Quran. There also has to be that connection that I was talking about previously. that understanding, that relationship, that studying of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell you, right? A scholar of the Quran, someone that actually can break down the Quran and explain it to you, is better than someone that's memorized the Quran, in my opinion. Right? Umar radiallahu anhu. How long did it take him to memorize Surah Baqarah? 10 years. Right? All of us are worried about our children, and from experience you have people that try to bring their children in to start reading the Quran at 4, 3, as soon as their child can even, start crawling, not even walking, right? They want them to memorize the Quran. Which is okay, the intention is there, that's nice, mashallah. But where's the rush? Why are you rushing? Umar radiallahu anhu took 10 years because why? To him it was more important that everything he memorized, he was practicing and following, and that he understood what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying to him, and that he lived by those words and just to memorize them and recite them for the purpose of reciting them. So when you do have your child memorize the Quran, or when you do take that journey of memorizing the Quran yourself, you have to check your intentions. What are your intentions? Are your intentions that you want everyone to say, oh mashallah, my child is a hafid? What is your child? My child memorized the Quran. Or I memorized the Quran. Who are you? Right? Is that your intention when you're memorizing the Quran? If it is, then why are you memorizing the Quran? You're playing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words. However, if you're memorizing the Quran as a way of self-improvement, then that's better for you and your child. And for a younger child, it might not really help them when they're young, but as they grow older, as they grow to appreciate the things you've done for them, that's when the Quran will start kicking in. So before you even start memorizing the Quran, make sure you check the intentions. And I see people yawning. I apologize for it. I'm talking this really monotone, exact same voice right now because my throat really hurts. So I don't think I can go and be like, wow, and wake you guys up with words right now. Inshallah, that's what the Quran and the Nasheed will be for in an hour. So just stay awake. I'm putting myself to sleep too. If I wasn't the one talking, I would be snoozing as well. So just bear with me. Listen to what I have to say. That's a little important. So, before you even start memorizing the Quran and putting your child in an institution or anything to do that, make sure you check your intentions. Right? That's what's more important. And then after that, you have to realize that not every child is the same and not every person is the same. Oftentimes, parents love comparing their children to other children, other people. This child memorized the Quran in 3 years. What are you doing with your life? Why is it taking you 5? Why can't you be like Abdullah? He did it in 2 years. Right? Abdullah recites so beautifully. Why can't you recite like Abdullah? Right? So as parents, you put all this pressure on your children to finish quicker, to do better, and all this stuff, while not understanding that the Quran, at the end of the day, you have a lifetime to memorize that Quran. It's easier as a child, sure, but no one says you have to be done with the whole Quran by the age of 10, 11, 12, 13. You can finish it at 20. You can finish it at 30. It's up to you in the time that you take out. Right? So when your child is memorizing the Quran, if you have them started at a very young age, don't be too hard on them. Be understanding that it takes time. It is a difficult thing. But one thing I told the sister today earlier is when it comes to memorizing the Quran, it only gets easier and easier. Like if you start up here and it's really hard, it just gets easier, 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 easier. Like it might still be hard for a while because you're still in the hard zone, but eventually it gets really easy. To a point where if you're memorizing 1 page up here, when you get down here to the end, you're memorizing 10 pages, 15 pages. Why? That sounds like, oh my God, someone's memorizing 10 pages. This is an amazing human being, he's a genius. No, not really. It's just that the Quran has so many words that repeat themselves over and over, so many verses that repeat themselves over and over. So all you're doing by the time you get to the last couple of juz, you already know all the words, you already know all the verses. You're just putting them together differently, not memorizing anything new. As compared to when you're just starting the Quran and you're starting your memorization, everything is new to you. Every word is new to you, every verse is new to you, every surah is new to you. Right? But then as you go on, things start repeating, things start coming back. All you're doing is putting things differently in your mind together. Just look at some surahs like Surah Rahman, right? How many times does فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ come in that surah? A lot. A lot of times. You don't have to sit there, you look at it and it's about 3 pages, that surah. Right? But if you were to take out all the فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءs, how much is it? Maybe like 2 pages, maybe less. Right? So at the end of the day, you're really memorizing only 2 pages, but you're actually memorizing 3. Right? So with that same concept, things repeat. You're not really doing anything. You could be memorizing 10 pages, but you only might be memorizing like 2 or 3 pages of new things or new words or new ayahs. So that becomes easier for you. Right? So don't go into the thing thinking that it's going to be super hard and difficult and that you can't do it. And if it does get difficult and if it is hard for you or your child, you have to understand what? That it gets easier and easier as long as you keep yourself motivated and you keep going yourself. Now, once you've understood that it's difficult and you've cleared your intentions, what's the next thing to do? The next step to memorize the Quran is you have to find a teacher. You have to. Oftentimes, people don't understand the importance of having a teacher. People think that they can memorize the Quran at home. They can memorize the Quran by themselves. They can teach their children.
صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما حتى تنالوا جنة ونعيما 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 صلوا عليه